Hello, and welcome to our first CRAP report. In this video, we look at the highs, the lows, and some baffling bullshit along the way. Spoon-feeding you information and opinions you didn't ask for, but will most certainly recognize. Before anyone gets cross, let's be clear, this is not an anti-Canal and River Trust channel. The Trust has to look after a vast aging network, often on a tight budget. There are genuinely dedicated staff and volunteers doing difficult work in a complicated environment. But there's also a long-standing habit of outsourcing routine work, paying contractors to do jobs once done in-house, and quietly losing skills along the way. That's not today's staff's fault. It's legacy management choices. Contractors, the default setting. As you're probably aware, CRT are having a rough time right now. Some of the system failures in 2025 have been, well, bonkers. Apparently, lack of funds are quite an issue. You'd be forgiven for thinking their Facebook PR team are paid per use of the phrases of funding cuts and climate change. And in the comments, you'll quite often see a response of,
"They need to stop wasting money on contractors."
That criticism is, bluntly, in my opinion, correct. CRT use contractors for pretty much everything. And I'm sure the list goes on. The contractor companies involved, I'm sure, are doing very well. But the problem isn't contractors. The problem is contractors being used for absolutely everything. That's not strategy. That's panic buying, and batshit bonkers. Where contractors actually make sense. Let's be fair, for major failures, embankments, reservoirs, major breaches, contractors are potentially the right choice. Modern-day site work is a legal obstacle course. Health and safety, insurance, compliance, liability. Doing physical work today is hostile. Ever since that McDonald's hot coffee incident in the 90s, the paperwork has been hotter than the drink. And now we have warning signs for the warning signs. So yes, civil engineers are useful when the job actually needs them, but not what we're seeing. The Trust appears to have retreated from having in-house departments altogether. How we got here. So, back in 2012, British Waterways rebranded into a charity. This was hoped to have many benefits, including financial. Since then, CRT have moved away from the British Waterways model. Some departments were closed and outsourced. Prime assets were sold rather than leased. Workboats were sold off. Work yards were sold off. Marinas were sold off. Some suggest detailed network knowledge was allowed to evaporate, and skills were lost. Risk and responsibility were outsourced to private companies along with profit. At the Trust, the assumption seems to have been that the gravy train would continue. The government grants and donations would keep flowing, and the contractors would simply keep the wheels turning. Well, that approach hasn't aged well at all. Looking around at all the failures, it looks like the wheels have fallen off. Today, CRT often looks less like an operating authority and more like a booking agency for contractors. The cost of reactive maintenance. With such a small in-house team at the moment, in comparison to the size of the maintenance required, minor problems are fenced off and left for dead. It appears known weak spots are patched, deprioritized, and then only revisited when they fail. And when they fail, they don't fail politely, they fail catastrophically. Those failures then require major civil engineering firms, huge bills, long closures, and reputational damage for the Trust. Reactive maintenance doesn't save money, it just delays the invoice and basically writes a blank check to corporate contractors. Toddbrook, a case study. Take the slipway at Toddbrook Reservoir. Vegetation and weed growth were left unchecked. Repeated overflows allowed water to creep behind the concrete face, undermining the soil beneath. Eventually, the army was called in and the townfolk were evacuated for fear of flooding. Reports suggest that routine cleaning, inspection, and repointing of the concrete could have prevented the failure. Civil engineers have now been on site at Bosley Breach for 6 years at enormous cost to the trust and disruption to the local residents and businesses. Is this when deferred repairs become a civil engineering emergency? So what would better management look like? It's not complicated. You invest in an in-house maintenance team large enough to fix small problems early. Take this failing bank wall near the river Goit. The current solution? Fence it off, instead of deploying a team to repair it. It's not as if their team aren't qualified enough to do this. Take a look at this example from last winter. This stone wall with lime mortar was rebuilt. They didn't need to drain the whole canal, just the edge. These kind of fixes should be going on much more often. Looking at this wall, it will most likely eventually collapse and potentially breach the canal into the river Goit which runs alongside and require expensive civil engineering intervention. The Bosley Breach 2025, when temporary becomes permanent. At Bosley, an apparent decade-old quick fix finally failed spectacularly. By local recollections, originally, an aggregate bag with sand or clay was used to plug the leak with clay added around it. Over time, more and more clay was added. What's less clear is how thoroughly that area was investigated afterwards. From the outside, it looks like a temporary measure quietly became permanent. And that's the problem with temporary fixes. They don't delicately fail, they fail at once. This failure took a lot of water out of the reservoirs just before summer. I believe this is what happens when maintenance is poorly managed. Catastrophic failures, however, do focus minds in offices and funding mysteriously appears. But they're terrible for boaters, residents, and the trust's credibility. The Whitchurch Canal breach, when priorities suddenly align. There was an awful embankment failure over Christmas at Whitchurch. At 4 a.m. in the morning, the elevated embankment gave way and boats plummeted to the bottom of the hole. Luckily, all boat dwellers got out safely and there were no lives lost, but this could have easily been very different. The trust say the elevated embankment was inspected 3 weeks earlier. That does beg the question, are the inspections thorough enough? Is ground-penetrating radar not used? It exists. So the Canal and River Trust conduct is now firmly in the national spotlight. Are culvert catastrophes to be the new norm? What is worth saying is the Trust's response was substantial. With all the newspapers looking at them, the scale of the response shows what can be done when resources are actually focused. I do hope the Whitchurch failure sharpens maintenance priorities. Many more elevated weak spots exist. Like this known weak spot at Bollington, it leaks pretty much annually. There's more broken concrete further along. This video from 9 years ago shows how much water was leaking into the wreck back then. The bed of this canal is similar to the Toddbrook slipway. It's a thin skim of concrete. Have the Trust thoroughly inspected the erosion under this slab? And the final subject for this video, contractor reliability. If a tree falls in a canal, how long does it take to move? This tree fell across the canal on the 14th of November 2025, and I can guarantee it will still be there post-January the 7th, 2026, which is the next review date. By then, however, it may have heritage status. The official explanation is,
At present, we're unable to confirm when the contractor will be on site, as adverse weather from Storm Claudia is impacting our waterways.
Yes, we all know this, but how many trees fell for f***'s sake? The National Forest. The result? Boats unable to navigate. An electric boat praying its batteries last? Some poor sod didn't even see the stoppage email or assume the tree would be cleared quickly. But quickly seems to be an aspirational concept. So let's take a look at this unmovable beast. This isn't just any tree, it's a specialist tree, requiring specialist contractors at a specialist cost, for a job once done in an afternoon by British Waterways. Now navigation is at the mercy of contractors and their availability. Personally, I'd wager the issue here isn't actually Storm Claudia. It's more likely there simply isn't a workboat in this section of the canal, and getting one here most likely won't happen, due to the planned stoppage between Bridge 22 and 23 on the Upper Peak Forest Canal. This stoppage is vast, and an excellent use of civil engineers, and credit where credit's due, it's a solid bit of progress for the Peak Forest Canal. That area was losing quite a bit of water. So, to close. Yes, contractors are essential, but you can't use contractors for everything. The Trust's survival, especially with reduced government funding, depends on rebuilding a capable, well-resourced in-house maintenance team, and using contractors where they actually add value. Preventative maintenance isn't rocket science or a big ask. It's certainly cheaper than emergencies. So that's the first CRAP report. Bit longer than I wanted, slightly uncomfortable, but hopefully fair and necessary. So that's me, Bob Slacker, Senior Nitpicker, signing off.